Welcome to the What's Your Ceiling podcast. We're your hosts, Monty Wyatt and Paul Szynski. Wherever you are in life, there is a higher ceiling. This podcast is how you become aware of it and how to take action to push through it. It's time to discover your ceiling.
Welcome to the What's Your Ceiling podcast, where we talk about your health, your family, your business. I'm Monty Wyatt.
I'm Paul Szynski.
And we want to start off today. We had a wonderful trip last weekend. We went to Omaha and we joined the Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting. And there were over 40,000 people there. And it was just amazing time of people watching for one, but learning from Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. And we just want to start off today with a few learnings, a few things that we gained from the event. And Paul, I'm going to start off with you. What were a few things that you gained from the event in Omaha?
Well, I'll tell you what, it was a great event, Monty. I really enjoyed it. I've been going to the Berkshire Hathaway meeting off and on for a few years. But one of the great things of going to the Berkshire Hathaway meeting is when Charlie and Warren Buffett get up there, Charlie Munger, they get in front of you. They talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. They don't hold it back. They'll tell you their failures, they'll tell you their success, which I found to be great because, as we all know, a lot of times you have more failures than you have success. They have no problem telling the whole story, and which I love about it. They're up front, they tell the story. Some other things I got out of it is, obviously today, Warren Buffett is 92 years old. Charlie Munger is 98 years old. So how many years left, I don't know, but everybody asks him that every year. But we found over 40,000 people. They had standing room only. The ballroom was full, and they turned the people away. So it was outstanding. But one of my biggest takeaways is when Warren talked about buying properties or buying businesses and looking into the future, one of his biggest things was buying patterns, human buying patterns, and how they looked at things. And he talked about there's people that have two cars. When things get tight, they'll give up that second car before they'll even give up an iPhone. So he does study, so he stays ahead, and that was something I took from being there. Another thing is we got the opportunity to meet a lot of people from all over the world. We met a gentleman from Germany.
Yep.
We met another gentleman from New York City, another person from India. What was great about what I got out in those conversations is no matter what around the world, if you want to start a business and build anything, you come to the United States. And it talked about how we need to get the leadership to, let's get this leadership together and work together. And I found that to be interesting. And I know you have a lot of takeaways. Tell a little bit about what you gained over the weekend.
What I thought was interesting is they answered questions for over 5 hours. I think there was they started with the first 15, 20 minutes just sharing their high-level numbers, and then they went into a question-and-answer session. And there were people from 13 and 14-year-old children to older people that were asking questions all about strategy, all about AI, all about the future. And the knowledge that those two gentlemen had was amazing to me, that they read every day, they understand the business world, they understand the world in general. And that's a big learning that I took away, is constant learning. Is always important, especially if you're at the level that they are, of how they think, how they interact, and what they know about what's going on in the world.
Yeah, they know their numbers, they believe in people, they buy management, and that's what it's about. Knowing your numbers, buying management, and they talked about that to an extent and introduced a couple of people, which was Greg Abel, who's from Des Moines, Iowa, and then Ajit Jain, who's another great leader in the insurance business. So it was a great meeting, and I'm looking forward to seeing another meeting next year.
One of their companies is Dairy Queen, and I think we stopped at Dairy Queen 4 times, so we had our ice cream fill. So, but it was fun to see. They had a big kind of a bizarre area where they had a lot of their retail companies had stores there, from Brooks to Dairy Queen to Nebraska Furniture Mart to the railroad was there. So they had so many things you could learn about the different companies. So it was a very good experience to get exposure to that organization. So if you ever have the chance, that was a great event to learn from and attend.
And actually, if you take the time, you can go on YouTube and watch the whole 8 hours, because they'll set up there they go from 8 in the morning till noon, and then they come back 1 to 4:30. and I believe they answer over 60 questions. So it's a great event. But if you get an opportunity, you want to look on YouTube, you'll be able to see what this year 2023 event. And
yeah, we had a great time. So on to our guest today. We've got a wonderful guest that has some great experience of growing up, but a wonderful family and what they've built as an organization. So Paul, if you would introduce our guest today.
I am pumped about our guest today. I look up to him as a smart guy that has done some really interesting things. And we're talking about scaling by relationships today. And this gentleman, he owns BH Management. He owns BH Equities. He currently, their management company manages over 109,000 units, number 8th in the United States. He well over $1 billion in gross revenues. He's in 38 different states and has over 3,000 employees. I want to introduce to you one of the best property management company persons in the United States, Harry Bokey. Harry, welcome to join What's Your Ceiling, and we're glad to have you here.
Thank you, Paul. I know it was planned to be Warren Buffett, but I'll accept it.
Well, you're pretty close, I can tell you that. There's a lot of people have a lot of respect for Harry and the decisions, and we're going to get into that today. And I think we're excited about how you started out. I mean, you come from a great family, you build a great family. Talk to us a little bit about how you got into business and become the man that you are today.
Well, I got my father was in the meatpacking business. And when I was 16 years old, I became a cattle buyer. And so I used to drive around to Iowa farms and in different locations in Nebraska and so forth, and negotiated the acquisition of cattle to be taken to the meatpacking house. So that was a good start for me. I also have a law degree, and that also helps out in times to have an understanding of the law and so forth.
But you know, Harry, you actually started out young as a businessman. I mean, you got right into the business years ago, because a lot of people don't realize you met a Russian leader that came over here with the Garst family in Iowa, and your family had an opportunity to host him for a couple hours prior to the Garst family, and that was interesting. And that started out as a young age. You're probably 9, 10, 11 years old, I'm guessing. And then you went on into the cattle buying business, and that was probably the first, I'm guessing.
That was really my first experience in business. As I related to you, in college and went to law school, and I got graduated in law school, but I moved to Australia right after law school, as I was it was a relationship that didn't work out. So I wanted to get to the furthest place away from the United States that I could be, and that was English speaking, and that's why I went to Australia. I ended up working for a large department store there in various departments, and also spent some time on a cattle ranch in just north of Melbourne. I was there for about a year and a half, and then my father became very ill, and I came right home, and so that's kind of how I started. I got back into the state of Iowa, and I got a job as an associate at a relatively large law firm, and was a lawyer for close to 20 years, 15 to 17 years, something like that.
Wow, that's interesting. I know, but it was age 16 when you first started buying cattle, though.
Yes, well, my father's business was still active, and I was. It was kind of a summer job to be a cattle buyer, and that's kind of how I learned how to negotiate. Was taken advantage of by many times, and but it worked out as something very, very important for me in the future.
No, that's amazing. I think what an education. You kind of got thrown right in there, and negotiation, because if anybody's been in the cattle business, that takes negotiation.
Yes, it does.
Especially here in Iowa, around the country.
And these farmers might be smarter than they look. I can tell you that much.
That's right. They are. They're sharp people.
I want to go to a story that you were telling us early on when you were 9 or 10. when the Russian leader came over. I think there's a great quote that you had that I want you to share with our audience, that just to relate, to show how you were thinking at that young age.
Well, I was only, I think, 9 years old or 10 years old, and Nikita Khrushchev was the premier of Russia. He was probably the most controversial figure in the Cold War. He actually came over to the United States for 3 reasons. The United Nations, he wanted to make a stand there and tell people what he thought, which was very controversial. He actually beat his shoe on the podium at the speech in the United Nations. He wanted to go to Des Moines, Iowa area so that he could renew his relationship with Roswell Garst, who is a famous farmer in the state of Iowa and was a great proponent of citizen diplomacy. And then the third thing he wanted to do at the time was go to Disney World. As it turns out, my uncle was in the State Department, and there was a 3 or 4 hour gap between the time he arrived in Des Moines and the time he would get together with Roswell Garst. So my father asked if it would be okay to bring him to the packing house. It's agricultural in nature. So that's kind of what happened. My father told me to stay at the back of the line, which I did. And earlier, right before that time, I saw him eating a hot dog in one of the coolers. And as I was going into this major room, he was coming out. I was at the back of the line. He ran over to me and put his arm around me, and I looked at him and I said, "Well, you may have beat us to the moon, but we make better hot dogs." And so that was basically my 10 seconds of fame. It was in newspapers all over the world. And what more can I say about it?
And you were, what, 9, 10 years old when you made that comment?
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's great. And then you went in, age 16, you're a cattle buyer. You go on to college, I believe, at Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
You go on to Australia. And then you were talking about what brought you back from Australia.
Well, my father became very ill, and I was planning on actually staying in Australia for a longer period of time. But I decided to come back and take care of my father, which was pretty urgent. And so I did, and I got a job in a law firm, a big law firm in Des Moines area, and I was an associate there. That's how I started out. And my father did pass away. The business, he had sold the business a few years earlier. There were some meatpacking plants that opened up in various parts of the United States, New Mexico, Missouri, and those places, and it really eliminated the independent meatpacker in the country. Most independent meatpackers in the country. As a result, he had sold his business a few years earlier, and then I was in the law practice, and I met my wife. She's from Chicago, and but one of the issues that I always had as a lawyer is I always wanted to be the client, and so that I think that's what one of the reasons that led to me to getting out of the law firm and getting into business.
Let's touch on that for a second. So you're a lawyer, and you realized you like to be on the other side of the table. Mm-hmm. Was that because you were kind of intrigued with business at the time, or you liked?
Well, a little bit unhappy being in the law practice and wanting to kind of get into business. And I had worked a lot. I had worked with a lot of represented a number of real estate syndicators who went out and raised money and put apartment deals together, and they relied upon me pretty much for helping them legally and also making business decisions for them. So I was really excited about possibly getting into that same business. So that's when I quit in 1992, I believe it was.
Right. And then you get into the business, you quit being a lawyer, you just open your own office and on a whim. And
I had a friend who had an 8 foot by 10 foot room that was not being used in his office, and he invited me to come over there, and I did. Unfortunately, the office was right next to a psychiatrist who used the primal scream method of treatment. And so about every half an hour, I would hear somebody screaming next door. But I was there for a year, and I didn't do another transaction until 1993. Or I didn't do any transaction till 1993. I had a friend from Chicago who knew somebody in New Orleans who had gone bankrupt in the 80s, and he was trying to put a deal together in the 90s. He had a property under contract in San Antonio, Texas, and it looked very promising. So I called up this person. I got on a plane and went down to Texas for the first time. And that's, it looked very promising. We only had to raise a few $100,000. So I came back to Des Moines, begged some of the clients I had and some of the other people I knew. We put together, I think, $350,000, $400,000 to buy the deal. But in those days, and this is very important for the growth of my company, in those days, when you purchased a property, you physically went to a closing. Today, it's all by Zoom or digital and so forth.
Now, that was back in the savings and loan. Right?
This is the savings and loan crisis.
In the early 90s.
In the early 90s. And the savings and loan, most all the transactions were in default. The savings and loan was just trying to get them off their books. So I went to the closing, and it was later in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I asked the owner of the savings and loan, that was the owner of the property, I said, "Would you like to have dinner?" I was hungry, it was late in the day, and he said, "I would love to, but unfortunately I have to go to another closing." And I said, "Well, it's 5 o'clock, what closing are you going to?" He said, "The closing for this deal." And I said, "Well, I thought we were at the closing for this deal." He said, "No, we're at your closing. I go down to the federal savings and loan, and they give me the difference between my mortgage and what you're paying me." So I looked at him and I said, "David, you don't care what the price is." And he gave me that kind of Texas nope. And I said, "Well, do you have any more of these properties?" And he said 4. And that's kind of, so we cut a deal on the next 4, similar to what we had on the one that I bought. And that's, so my whole career started by asking somebody for dinner.
You know, that is really cool, because let's talk about this. So you go down there, how many units are you negotiating for at the beginning? How many units?
The first property was called Brooksfield. It was in southern San Antonio. It was 156 apartments. The rest of the other 4 units was probably 1,200 to 1,400 apartments.
12 to 1,400 units. Mm-hmm. Now, you know what this is really, and this is the first transaction in real estate after you started your business. After a year being in it, you went down for 156 units, and you come back with about 1,500 units.
Well, I came back with 156, but we ended up negotiating the other 4 properties, and that got the business started. We had enough units to hire a person or two to work with me, and we had to set up a way to provide our clients with with news and provide them with checks quarterly and so forth. So it kind of got me into the business. I wasn't just by myself.
So what did you have to learn and grow? Because that was a new transaction for you. How did you have to change when you started that first transaction and got that first business?
Well, the real estate broker from Texas, his name was Jim Charnquist. He was a former Olympian and kind of had that Texas drawl and everything. And so I had asked him at the time I was driving down to look at the property. I said, "So Jim, why do you approve this? Why do you like this property? The area is just average." And he said, "Well, Jim told me that this area was great for apartments, and there was not that many in the area. So it was a supply and demand situation, and that's why the property always stayed full." So I've always used that as a guideline to understand, what the competition would be if I got into the property. And that's kind of one of the lessons I learned. And I like to buy on value, not necessarily what's happening at the time or what could happen in the future. So I learned a lot from just picked up different elements at the time and started to really focus on detail. I thought detail was the most important aspect. And we were working with working class tenants, and I know that people who are hotty-toddies and whatever, high-end people, they expect a lot of attention to detail. And sometimes when people are more in the middle class or lower classes, they're not getting it from the owners. But they desire it just as much as any rich person. That's one of the things we learned. So we took a very active part in trying to appreciate all the details on the site, whether it's the grass, whether it's the painting, whether it's the interiors of the units, and I think that's made a big difference in our company going forward.
Yeah, and I find you had actually, you're obviously a detailed guy, but you also met another guy in New York that was a lot like you, which is a great story. And you might want to tell us a little bit about the family you helped manage their properties, I believe.
Yeah, a few years later, we were pretty successful in the industry. We had a pretty good reputation, and I guess we touched base with a person in New York named Richard Wilpon. The Wilpon family, among other things, owns the New York Mets, or did own the New York Mets, and they were a very big show in our industry. And I became very friendly with them, and we ended up doing probably 15 or 20 transactions with the Wilpons. And the Wilpons would allow us to keep a little piece of the equity, and but at the same time, they had the resources to buy almost anything. So as it turns out, we had a property in Washington, in Washington, D.C. area. It was close to 1,500 apartments, and the Wilpons actually had bought it with us, and we sold it for a huge profit, over $100 million, 7 or 8 years later. So I called Richard Wilpon's assistant, and I said, aren't they going to give us a bonus or call and tell us how great we are or anything like that? And he said, no, that's just Richard. Well, so a week later, Richard's associate asked me to have dinner with Richard. And I thought, wow, here comes the money. And so we had dinner at the 11 Madison, which was the fanciest restaurant in Manhattan. And Danny Meyer, who runs Shake Shack, he was actually our waiter at the time. But after dinner, we got up. We hadn't really talked about anything, the deal or the bonus or anything. And Richard looked at me and he said, Harry, there's something I wanted to talk to you about. And I said, well, what's that, Richard? And he said that one of the properties in Arlington, Texas, there was grass growing out of the cracks on the tennis court. So I looked at him and I was having an out-of-body experience, but I said, Richard, when I leave our dinner here, I'm going to go take care of that. And he said, thank you, and that was it. So I called up his associate again, and he told me that, that's just Richard. So a week later, I get a call from Richard's associate again, and he said that they had an investment group that wanted to invest with them, but they wanted clients of Richard's they wanted to talk with people like myself. So I took the call, and it was the Fireman's Pension Fund of Cincinnati, I believe. And it talked a little bit about doing business with the Wilpons, and he said to me, what's it really like? And I told him this grass on the tennis court story. Well, the next day, Richard's associate calls, and he said to me, Harry, what did you tell this guy? And I said, I told him about the grass on the tennis court. And he said, they were going to give us $5 million, and they gave us $25 million. So it was, the way I looked at it is, if Richard Wilpon was worried about the grass on the tennis court in Arlington, Texas, that's who you want to keep your money with. So from that moment on, too, we've been very, very careful and fastidious about the details on a site. And that's, I think, been a big part of our success.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. And you're that way anyway. I think, Harry, you like detail and you like things done right. But you grew your company, and I'd have to say probably, from the outside perspective, probably one of your most proud moments had to have been 2021 when Fortune magazine rated your business the #1 business to work for in like 3 or 4 different categories. It was diversity, women, a great place to work. And that had been a great honor to be able to do that.
Well, this is another situation that luck played a very big role. We, 10 years before that, in, I guess 2012 or something like that, we were working with a client who was out of California, actually, and he had a woman that was running his company in Michigan. He decided to get out of the business and move to Brazil or something like that. And I got a call from this woman, Joanna Zabriskie is her name, who was, she had worked for him, and she was kind of saying if we could get together. And so she came to Des Moines, and I gave her a position, and then she's become the president and CEO of her company, and she's just tremendous. We complement each other perfectly, and she's brought in so many great people in different categories of the business during our growth period, and so that's made a great difference in her. That was another element of luck, right? Her boss decided to go a different direction. We got together, and it's been a great situation ever since. So, and then the other thing is too, I think that has helped us a lot in the business is there's been 2 times during my career where there's been economic dislocation. One was after 9/11, and the other was 2008. After 9/11, there was huge dislocation in the apartment industry. And most owners were going back to their lenders. They were trying to renegotiate their entire transactions. Well, we never renegotiated a deal in 2008 or 2011, or 2008 or 9/11. And I think that we had a lot of integrity in the industry, and that made a difference because people could trust us to do what we needed to do. And bankers, lenders, equity people, it really helped generate our acceptance in the industry and people that were very supportive of us.
Yeah, I agree. But building a reputation, doing what you say you're going to do is important. But something that we always talk about with our podcast Achievers is how important are people. And talking about you gave credit to a lot of the people for the 2021 best place to work in the United States was BH Management. And I think every great business strives to do that. And I think, Monty, we talk about that all the time. It is about the people in the right seats. And Harry's shown it's a perfect example of that model. Mm-hmm. And so
I'd love to hear what you did as an organization to get your team to recognize that this is a place that we want to tell the world that we're the best to work at.
Yeah, well, I kind of come from the Danny Myers school of business. You know, Danny Myers says the most important people in your industry are not your clients, but your employees. And we've always had a very, very strong program for training, for getting together, for creating an atmosphere and culture that really has made us difference, especially in the apartment business, because you're dealing with houses, you're dealing with people's residences. This is not a net lease of a Starbucks or a net lease of a McDonald's. You're dealing with people's homes, and there's it's a tough business on a lot of properties, whether it's the high end or low end. The high end people complain a lot more about little things, but it's a place where people are living, and it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of understanding, and we've tried very hard to work with our people so that they're very. When I go onto a site, I go directly to the maintenance guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're the most important people for the people living there. Now, they're not the most important people for getting other people to move in, but they are. So that's kind of where we've built the standard in our industry, at least for us.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody's voice matters, especially if you're trying to build something. And, you've built this great company with great people. Now, I know you're now doing a lot of charities now. I know you've, the Temple of, the Temple of Performing Arts. You have a restaurant that you support at Centro in the Des Moines metro area. I know you're working on helping young people. You're also working, I believe, world peace. And those are many of the great things that this company's put you in position to do. And could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, we, when I got into the middle of the business I guess it was 20 years ago, in 2001, I guess, they had a temple building they were tearing down. It was a Masonic temple building, and it was very historic and beautiful, and they were going to do a clean-cut park. And it just caught my attention and my wife's attention, and so we decided, we went there and we looked at it and said, this building should not be torn down, even though the Greater Des Moines Downtown Partnership and all the business people felt that way. And we gathered a bunch of preservationist people and were able to turn the prejudices of the city council towards us, and so that's how we ended up building it. And from that, we had to open a restaurant, and it's kind of a long story, but we were lucky to find a guy that could do that had never really had a restaurant of that scope.
And he's from the Bronx.
He's from the Bronx, and it was obviously an Italian restaurant. And as it turns out, we opened the first restaurant at the temple that was the first restaurant in over 18 years. And since the time we opened the restaurant, there's been 36 new restaurants built in downtown Des Moines. So we feel very that it was helped accelerate the progress in downtown Des Moines and elsewhere. And that kind of got us involved in I guess you call it got us involved in a lot of charitable work. The Symphony is one of our main clients, and we started a music academy for young kids. And that's led to a lot of other things. So that was how we got started in the charitable business.
Now, your wife Pam's a big part of a lot of that charity.
Pam's
she's a leader.
She's very much a leader. She's been very active at the Art Center and numerous other activities, and it's been a great. We've worked together on a lot of things as well. So. What can I say?
And then you have 3 beautiful daughters that are very successful.
Yes.
And they're scattered around the country now. Tell us a little bit about your 3 daughters and their names.
Well, our oldest daughter is worked at Google. She graduated from a school in the East at Wesleyan, and she worked at Google for a number of years. She got married, and then they started their own. It's a business in selling, not in selling, in promoting books for children. They went on Shark Tank, and they started in Shark Tank, and Mark Cuban gave them some money to get started, and they've had this literature for young people program for now 10, 12 years.
And that's educating young people?
Educating young people. They work with libraries. They work with they evaluate books for young people, and then they have a podcast situation. So they've it's been a very successful situation, and they're kind of all over the world. Our middle daughter, Blaine, she graduated from Northwestern and got a law degree, and she now teaches at Hastings Law School and she's in head of the Gender and Refugee Studies at Hastings. That's a separate entity, but she also runs that, and it's been a very instrumental in immigration, refugees. She's been down to Haiti many times. She's been on the border, and she is now. This summer she's going to be. They asked her to go to Oxford to be a student, I guess, and also work with other people. And then our younger daughter her name is Natalie. She was working in Chicago. Then Obama put his name in the ring, and so she quit her job and went to work for him. And she ended up in the White House with Michelle. So what can you say? Now she works for the Obama Foundation. And she actually went out to the president called her, and that's it.
Oh, that's an honor. That's an honor, and I think her and Michelle are good friends too. And
oh yeah, she was in when they asked her what she wanted to do at the White House. She said she wanted to go to the East Wing with Michelle, and so that's how they became friends. She took them to Ghana, and it was a good job.
Wow.
And now she's married. They all have. Each of them have 2 children, a son and a daughter.
Well, that's interesting, Harry. What a great life and a great business, a great family, and you're giving back. What I really love when you see somebody that works that hard, becomes a certain success, and now it's about giving back. And I think that's a big part of what you're about. And I think people in Iowa and the Midwest and around the United States appreciate what you do.
Wow, I appreciate that, but there's a lot of good luck is a good aspect of this thing. We have had some down times in 2008 and 9/11, but we've also had some being in the right industry. For example, today there's all these great real estate guys that own office buildings all over the country. So, but what's happening to them? COVID and work at home and Zoom and all this kind of stuff, which is making it really challenging. I could have had the same situation had I got into the apartment business in 1982. In 1988, it was underwater. So I think a lot of it has to do with good fortune. We've worked hard and had great people, and that's made a big difference for us.
Yeah. I think that's, I'm big about that, Monty, as you well know, and as it is about people and it's about giving. And it's a perfect example of where you're at, Harry. I mean, that's what we needed, and I think what people strive to be. What's your thoughts?
Absolutely. One of the things we like to ask our guests is, what do you want to be known for? And so as you think about leaving an impression on the world, what are some things you want to be known for?
I know you had it in those pre-questions for me, but the answer is, I really can't answer that. It'll be up to my kids, friends, family, and people I worked with and for. And I can't. I don't want to be necessarily famous or anything like that. I can't really answer that question. I apologize for that.
No, I think that's a great way to answer that. You doing your best every day, you're working hard, and you're wanting the people that you interact with to make that decision.
Yes.
And I think that's from your personality, from your impression that you left on everyone, you're wanting them to leave that.
Yeah, lead by example. I think, anybody that comes in, and it takes a leader to do those things, and Harry Bokey's been a leader, and not in charities, business, making sure things get done. That Temple Performing Arts building, when it ever happened, but those little things like that is getting those stuff done is what makes everything better.
Absolutely.
Got to have a leader.
Really enjoyed the conversation. What were some key takeaways that you've had from Harry today?
Well, it gets back to, Harry talked about buying value. He talked about, those details, the people, stuff like that is what is a foundation of building good companies and achieving. And we talk about going through ceilings, and what great ceilings, starting being you meet a leader from Russia. You go on at age 16 to be a cattle buyer, negotiating with adults. You had a heartbreak in college. You had to regroup, and you came back bigger and stronger. But he kept that true north, fight for that true north, and he got into I think an area that he could accelerate at. And he went through several ceilings, and gets back to, when anybody that can be Fortune magazine rated the #1 place in the United States to work.
I think that was limited to our industry, or it might be an overstatement.
For property management.
Yeah, we've won a lot of awards in that regard. We're a highly diverse company, and like I say, to us, the maintenance guys is important as the executive vice president in our company. So
yeah, that's what I loved. I loved your quote. The most important people are the ones who work for you, and I want our listener, the achiever, to hear that the most important people are the ones that work for you, because when you treat them well, they're going to treat the customer well. They're going to treat your client well. So I think that was powerful. You mentioned the word luck a lot, and I think there's, luck favors those that are prepared for it. And sometimes you're prepared, sometimes you may not be, but it took the assertiveness to ask that gentleman for dinner. It took being prepared for it.
I was hungry.
Well, that's assertiveness. When the belly's hungry, you go for it.
Okay.
But I love that, and everything is an element of luck. What's your return on luck? You got to take advantage of what's in front of you. So I think that's a great way to look at that. So. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Harry.
Good. You bet. Thanks for joining us on What's Your Ceiling. We talk about your health, family, and business. Look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks for joining us.
Hit that like button, subscribe.